Hello, thank you for joining us for New Wine, New Wineskins discussion and reflection on the coronavirus. And the theme today is stepping up, not stepping down. Stepping up, not stepping down as we engage this menace, this global menace, this pandemic at New Wine, New Wineskins. And thank you, friends, for joining me for this discussion on the coronavirus and stepping up, not shutting down. And the theme we're dealing with today is the coronavirus. Don't point fingers, lend a hand, and give your heart. Here is a picture of Jesus, our Lord, healing a man who was born blind. And we have that discussion in John chapter 9. And you see here how people are looking at this scene. Religious leaders are troubled by what Jesus is doing. The disciples have questions for him. And we'll just look at a portion of this as we proceed. But we have this problem today in our society with pointing fingers. It's a longstanding problem. Jesus talked about, deal with the issues in our own lives before we focus on the issues in other people's lives. To take the redwood forest out of our own eyes before we take the toothpick out of others is how I tend to word it. And we tend to point fingers, and we point fingers at others, claiming that they're to blame for this. And so one example of this would be the quote unquote Chinese virus. We hear people using that language here and abroad, no doubt. And it comes in a variety of sizes and flavors, so to speak, but accusing the Chinese, if you will, for the nation of China or others for being the cause of this virus and its spread. You may have heard God's death angel. I know of a pastor or pastors who've used that kind of language, saying that God is judging this people group or that people group because of this virus. So we see people pointing fingers that you're to blame for this. It could be that we blame Democrats or we blame Republicans, or we could blame globalization. I came across that one too, that if it weren't for globalization, we wouldn't be in this mess. So we have various scenarios as to why or what people are saying in terms of pointing fingers. And there could be other reasons for this being the case, why people point fingers. Let me pause at this juncture to ask the question, and that is, why do you think, my friends, why do you think people point the finger? What is it about our brokenness, our fallen human nature, as we say in Christian circles, that would lead us to point the fingers? I tend to do that too. I'm not to blame, they are, whoever they might be. So how does that come into play? Why do you think that is in terms of our wiring?
I do think that whenever just bad things happen and unexpected things, tragedy and the like, we want to find someone to blame. We want to find someone to say, you are the reason for this, or delayed response to something, you are the cause of this, even if it's something that's unforeseen. So I think we do have a nature inside all of us in many regards to try to find someone or try to just point the finger at something to say, this thing is the bad guy, this thing is the reason for this tragedy that's befallen on all of us. So I think that tendency is what many of us have in us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Phil. Appreciate that. Others?
Yeah, Paul, are you, I just have a question of clarification. Are you saying that because if someone calls the virus like a Chinese virus or the China, like that is a negative aspect of it? Or you're saying the blame by blaming people because it's from China, then they're the blame for the disease? Like, are you just talking about in our language or in the way in which we act out, I guess, towards the disease?
Well, I know, thank you, Matt. I know some have said, well, they're just trying to say that this was the source of it. I find the language, I'll just be honest, I find the language extremely problematic, extremely dangerous because of how it's been taken up, for one. And I think it's a loaded statement. but what I'm really after is the language, and in this context, dealing with a very complex reality, to even frame it by way of geographic boundaries, I think is disturbing, because it is a pandemic that it's been picked up and developed, and you know, and carriers abound. So do we even know where the real source of it is? To me, the real issue is, let's get at the solution to it. But I hope I'm making sense, and feel free to come back and ask for further clarification if I'm missing your point, Matt. But it's a good question.
I think that some of the reality of the whole Chinese culture, I mean, from our family, my in-laws that are Chinese, there's a bit of nervousness. And my brother-in-law was confronted in a grocery store because he has allergies, and kind of cleared his throat and got confronted. Like, are you from mainland? Have you been sick? I mean, and some of the churches that are predominantly Chinese in nature, even in our southwest area of Portland, there's some anxiety and angst going on with their interactions with the communities, because Asian period is being questioned.
Yeah, thank you, Trudy. I can only imagine what that must be like for your family members when they're confronted, in a grocery store, or just that wariness, that concern. It's heavy. One or two other thoughts?
Yeah, Paul, I was going to say one of the reasons I think to try to point the finger and project blame on someone else or something, I really about it, our fallen human nature, and we are seeking some answers to our abilities. And so what we do to satisfy that, we'll come up with something and point the finger. I know I've heard a number of these, and they are quite disturbing. In some case, they're used for, if for lack of a better word, emotional medication.
Cliff, that's a good word, even though it's a troubling word. I mean, it's a good word that gets at so much, that emotional medication. It was breaking up a bit there, Cliff, but I caught that wording of emotional medication. I think by pointing the finger, we almost feel like we can get a handle on the situation, and it can provide some kind of stability for us and closure for us. But at what cost? And really, is that really healthy for others and healthy for ourselves? And thank you, Cliff. One more. Anyone else who wants to share?
I think part of it too is just that American evangelicalism, the way we have historically postured ourselves towards culture, is us against them. So anything that's happening out there that's part of an evil world, and here the church, we're the people of God. So there's just a natural tendency for us to point at things happening out in the world and saying, "Yep, that's bad. That's where evil is," and so we blame.
Yeah.
I just the reason I brought it up is because,
thank you, Brad.
Is because the labeling of viruses has been just geographic. That's all I was saying, is like, I get the pointing fingers, and I totally get the language, and I think we need to be mindful of that. But to say that, it's pointing fingers simply because it's called, like, some might label it as the Chinese virus. All I'm saying is, in light of like MERS and SARS, like all of those have been named by the geographic area that they came from. So that's all I'm saying is, couldn't it, when someone's talking that way, they could just simply be using language simply based on that. So just all my question is to not take it as it's always pejorative if someone is using that language. And so that's what.
Well, and thank you again, Matt. As we transition, let me just say this in response. Even if someone means it merely geographical, I would say that even if their intent is not to cause harm, I think there is harm in that kind of language, because the situation is so much more complex than that. If we put ourselves in other people's shoes, if we were to say the Germanic virus or the American Germanic virus, let's say some other virus, okay, because people say, well, it's not this one. I don't think I would like it if someone said the white man's virus or the white American's virus or American virus. I think it tends to really problematize the situation, and the long-term effects, as Trudy was saying, are huge. Let me transition to this point. And again, Matt, I really appreciate the question. Let me proceed, and we can come back later for more on this discussion. I see that the phone lines are, the phone's ringing off the hook. The chat box is lighting up. Well, just one so far. But this theme of globalization and other, and Democrats, Republicans, God's death angel, Chinese virus, all of this has been shared. And so it's not just Chinese virus, it's some of these other pointing finger aspects that come into play. Now we come to John chapter 9, where we see Jesus engaging. And I love looking for different cultural renditions of biblical stories. And so this one that's African, where you see Jesus as an African healing another person's eyes. And we see this.
Jesus.
I'm sorry?
I love your Jesus.
Thank you. Thank you. Amen. As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I'm in the world, I'm in the light of the world. I am the light of the world. Having said these things, he spit on the ground and made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. I just love this story, as I'm sure you do as well. We see Jesus engaging this man, caring for this man, but you also come across in the midst of it challenges, not only from his disciples asking what for them is no doubt innocent questions or an innocent question, but some challenges that are going to be posed to the man and to Jesus as a result of Jesus healing this man. So another one of these pictures from church history, more of an icon, Jesus healing the man and the man going to wash as Jesus instructs him, onlookers observing, whether Pharisees or disciples. What strikes you about the disciples' question? I'm just going to share what strikes me about this as we proceed. And then I'll ask this question, what stands out to you about Jesus' response? To me, the disciples' question is the kind of question that I would often ask. And at least the way I come across this question, or as I perceive this question, is who's to blame? Who's to blame? Is it this man that's to blame for his blindness, or is it his parents? Jesus responds very differently to them than how I might. And maybe I'd be the kind of person who would say, well, it was this man or it was the parents, because it's easier to do that. We look for simple cause-effect relationships. Jesus has a typical Jesus response, kind of goes in a very different direction than what we might expect. He said, it's not this man's sin or his parents' sin. Namely, it's so that the glory of God might be manifest. And he says this. He says it's an opportunity for God to work wonders. I don't think it's that, this man was born blind simply so that Jesus could heal him. I don't think God uses us in this way. But I do think God never loses an opportunity. What is an obstacle to many is an opportunity for God. And Jesus is always looking at situations, even in the midst of the coronavirus, not simply in terms of obstacles, but also in terms of opportunities, an opportunity for God to work wonders. And that's why we as God's people, the church, should be looking not simply to the obstacle, and it truly is an obstacle for human flourishing and our world's flourishing, this coronavirus, but what might God do in the midst of it? Do we have creative imaginations. As Dr. John M. Perkins would say, we need to be creative in our suffering. He said that to New Wineskins years ago. So it's an opportunity for God to work wonders, and it's an opportunity to become part of the solution, and not, as what the disciples might be suggesting, add insult to injury. And as the Pharisees, instead of caring about this man being healed of his blindness, they just want to know, who did this, tell us more about him. And the man gets kicked out of the synagogue for this because of what Jesus did for him and how he then aligns himself with Jesus. But Jesus does not look at this as an opportunity to add insult to injury, but to become part of the solution. And he makes whole rather than tears down. Jesus always makes whole rather than tears down. The root for religion, historically, I believe from the Latin, is to make whole, to rebind a broken cosmos. How unfortunate it is that so often religion, the Christian religion, that we are seen as those who are divisive and who tear down, and we're called to make whole. And many Christians are about making whole and are doing great things in churches in the midst of the coronavirus. But Jesus always sends the message and provides the example and inspires us to make whole rather than to tear down. And then for us, it is about moving from pointing fingers to lending hands and giving hearts, giving our hearts as well as lending hands toward others. Any brief thoughts? We only have time for brief thoughts at this point during this hour. More time later, but any thoughts about this as you reflect on it from this passage? Anyone? Your opportunity is fading fast. Quickly, before Matt asks another challenging question of me. Quick, someone. Okay, I'm moving on. All right. So, with that, another picture of Jesus reflects more of a Middle Eastern cultural presentation or Eastern European, I'm not quite sure. But key is providing help in harm's way. And I think we would all agree that somehow or another, there's a need for us in stepping up and not shutting down or stepping down to provide help for others in harm's way. Not to poke the bear, whether it's the virus itself, to just kind of throw ourselves at it in a manner of just, we're flippant, we're inconsiderate of the need for social distancing for the well-being of others. So whether it's poking the bear of the coronavirus or even poking the bear of others just to kind of get a rise out of them in terms of challenging someone like Jesus. He wasn't trying to go at the Pharisees for how often he healed on the Sabbath. He wasn't trying to aggravate them to aggravate them's sake, but he was trying to make a point, and he was trying to probe their hearts. He wasn't poking the bear, but he was probing hearts. And he was out to engage people, to draw them, to get them beyond their hard-heartedness and their blindness. And so it was always redemptive or life-giving, even when he challenged hard. And he does this in John 9. He challenges the religious leaders. And in John 10, the very next chapter, he says he's the good shepherd, not like the poor shepherds or the bad shepherds, hearkening back to Ezekiel 34. And he no doubt has the religious establishment in mind in saying that he is not like the hired hands or the wolves or others. He is the good shepherd, not bad shepherds. Thinking about how they, instead of rejoicing that this man in John 9 was healed, are more fixated about it being on the Sabbath or that it was Jesus, and completely missing the point that Jesus is to make whole and provide help. And as I said, Jesus is probing hearts. And I think in terms of my own engagement with others in the midst of the coronavirus, there's a probing of my own heart that goes on. How am I responding to the need? I need to ask myself, how am I responding? People will react to our response. Let's say you're doing an amazing thing. Maybe your church, maybe you individually are doing an amazing thing. Jesus healed a person and was always healing, caring for people. And that wasn't like he always got applause for it, often just the opposite. And we cannot be fixated on people's reactions to good responses. We don't do it to get PR or promotion opportunities. It's because God loves us and God loves people and God loves this world, and that should just create a chain reaction in us. So we have to guard against, how we react, or we need to be proactive, not reactive. And when people respond, especially negatively, that we keep the focus, keep our eye on the prize, keep it on the people. And then our response to negative reactions, again, do we react further and we keep the vicious cycle going? Or do we continue to respond as Jesus did by focusing, while accounting for the problem, while accounting for people's negative reactions and calling it as he saw it? He didn't allow his emotions to get so taken up by it that it got him off track from caring for disciples, for the people, such as this blind man, and for others. He kept his focus. Thoughts on this, what I'm sharing, and especially what you find here in John chapter 9? Any thoughts?
I really react with what you said about how we respond, people's reaction to our responses, and that whole last section there. Working as an associate pastor at a church, we found that navigating these waters, this is an unprecedented time. We don't really know what we're doing. We're seeking to be humble and seeking to be helpful, seeking to be obedient. But no matter which direction you head in or where you tend to help, you get flack for it from either side. And I'm always fielding phone calls from one way or the other, not just critiquing what we've done, but also challenging that what we're doing is actually hurting people. And it's a really difficult, these are difficult waters to navigate, and to pay attention to our own reactions and to seek to be faithful and obedient is a tough thing to do. I think it just really speaks to this time. And the tendency, honestly, with a lot of my friends that are pastors, are to go the safe route, and to do very minimal, to just kind of pull back. So then if you don't, then you won't offend, you won't hurt, less waves, less issues. And I think that's problematic for the church, because this is an opportunity for us to be a light in a dark place. And if we're too worried about being safe, or too worried about people's reactions, or how we will respond to those negative actions, I think it's dangerous that the church won't be living up to being the church that it's called to be at this time. So I think this is a definite word, and a difficult word for church leaders in anywhere during this time.
Yeah, and so the challenges we receive can be paralyzing, right? I mean, it can be paralyzing because we don't want to do the wrong thing. We want to do the right thing. And even if people mean well, we might find ourselves paralyzed because it's like we trip over our own shadow. And we need to be wise. We need to listen to, as we'll see later, medical authorities and others, people looking at what others are doing, getting good counsel. But sometimes we have to just step out and not know always, and to be wise, but also people of faith. And so,
can we be humble?
It's hard. Yeah.
Can we be humble and say we tried, and maybe we didn't do it right? Maybe it wasn't the right thing. We took the information at hand. We were faithful and obedient and tried to do the best that we understood. But to live into that humility is not a normal stance for church leadership to take. Honestly, it's difficult. We want to be the answer people. Like, it's much easier to be the answer people than to be humble and say we're navigating these waters the best we can. Yeah. That's hard.
It is hard. It is hard. Well, we'll come back again. Feel free, when we go through this presentation that's going to be used more broadly, feel free to come back and interact further on this. I want to honor your time and the time of those who'll be watching later. But let's proceed further. Thank you, CJ. Christian history, healthcare and hospitals, and the mission of the church. For this particular class that we're offering through Multnomah Plus for New Wine, New Wineskins, one of the individuals I've had the pleasure and privilege of interviewing is Dr. Gary Ferngren, a professor of history at Oregon State University. And that interview, the full interview, will be included in this course. And we discussed what is called the conflict thesis. I know Dr. Harper discusses that in his historical theology classes. The conflict thesis by Draper and White and Draper, presents the idea, very problematic notion, that religion and science are often, if not always, opposed to one another. And that is a very difficult myth or faulty trajectory to deconstruct and destroy. You still find it in the popular media a lot, from people like Richard Dawkins to Neil deGrasse Tyson to the late Stephen Hawking. But the history is very complex, and you'll find, I think, more often than not, in various contexts in history, that there's been a much more positive, constructive view of faith and science, including healthcare and hospitals in the mission of the church that goes way back in history. And so we'll be discussing that in this course as a whole, this being the first segment of the course, the first class, so to speak, in this course for others for New Wine, New Wineskins. And what we find is the need, as we think through this talk as a whole in this discussion, again, not to point fingers, to lend a hand, to look to God, ultimately look to God. As Christians, I mean, I'm sure there's an amen, and we're going to be looking at Martin Luther and how he engaged the plague in his context in Wittenberg, Germany in 1527, when it was so devastating his community and much of Europe. Looking to God, Luther looked to God. We also have to look after the well-being of others. So we shouldn't just look after the well-being of others and forget about God. If we're not looking to God, we're never really going to be able to care truly for the well-being of others as Christians. This is how we see things. And then also, we need to point to science, again, not pointing fingers. We need to learn from science and the best of what science offers, rather than to have this conflict between faith and science, and to distrust science. Doesn't mean that everything that is posed to science is good. And I know some communities, some minority communities, have been abused by what has been propagated in the name of science. So I can appreciate some of the consternation and suspicions. At the same time, science has so much to offer, so much to teach us, not simply in medicine, but certainly in medicine. And Christianity historically has been on the forefront in providing healthcare, creating the hospitals, and often working very closely with the medical community. I see that we have a couple of comments, and by the way, you can see the screen fine, can you not?
I just asked, it looked like you were trying to share some pictures of Jesus with us. I didn't see any of the screen sharing, so I wasn't sure if you meant to do that.
Have you not been seeing the screen the whole time?
I haven't. I've just been seeing you looking at your screen.
CJ, what about you?
I'm seeing it. Looks good.
I can see it.
Okay, so let me look at, oh yeah.
Matt, if you can turn on the computer, I think, Matt, it would help.
Nope, I got it, good. We're good to go.
This is something that we've worked hard at New Wine over the years with Matt. And it's just, but the rest of you Christians, right? The Christians in the group,
No,
you can see the screen.
That's right, the pointer. I was following that. That's the problem.
Okay, let's see what else. I'm just going to take. Okay, thank you, Lynette, for saying it. I was going through major meltdown of just thinking, what? I did not share the screen. I'm just going to, CJ, if that's okay, I'm going to read your note here and then move forward. Does this relate directly to this one, or should I hold off?
That was from your first point.
Okay, well, we can always come back to that.
Yeah, move on.
Okay. So, Brad, any thoughts as a historical theologian on this particular theme, this slide?
On the issue of science and the conflict
Yeah,
thesis?
the conflict thesis, because this is more your area for sure.
Yeah, well, again, it's an issue that's been part of American evangelicalism. We are often more likely to do this than other groups because, part of our identity is rooted in the Scopes trial and biblical inerrancy and all of that. And so, science as an enemy is often more of a theme for us than it is other Christian groups, even who don't necessarily understand that. But yeah.
And any book that you'd recommend to people, Brad? I mean, Dr. Ferngren talked at length about this. I mentioned some of his works, but for those watching this session, anything that you would encourage people to just take a look at to show the complexity and even the constructive partnership between faith and science?
Well, I think one of the great sources is actually Derek Peterson's stuff and the videos that he's done on that, which I'm sure we have those at New Wine. They're great.
Yeah, and we'll have to make those available. And he has a new book coming out here, I think this autumn, on that subject. So we'll be promoting our colleague Derek Peterson's work. Thank you. Moving on, for those of you who have access to these PowerPoint slides, please keep clicking along with me. Stay with me. And for the rest of you, well, I'm not going to point fingers who that is. Okay, here's a quote from Martin Luther. And this is supposed to reflect Martin Luther himself working with the plague victims in 1527. I want to ask you for your thoughts on this as we proceed. Use medicine. He was asked, what should we do with this plague hitting Wittenberg? And many were encouraging him to leave Wittenberg. His wife was pregnant with their child, and many wanted to leave, many wanted him to leave, and he said, we need to stay put as leaders and care for our city. We cannot abandon it now. And so he said, use medicine, take potions, which can help you. Fumigate house, yard, and street. Shun persons and places wherever your neighbor does not need your presence or is recovered. And act like a man who wants to help put out the burning city. What else is the epidemic but a fire which, instead of consuming wood and straw, devours life and body? You ought to think this way. Very well, by God's decree, the enemy has sent us poison and deadly offal. Therefore I shall ask God mercifully to protect us. Then I shall fumigate, help purify the air, administer medicine, and take it. I shall avoid places and persons where my presence is not needed, in order not to become contaminated, and thus perchance infect and pollute others, and so cause their death as a result of my negligence. If God should wish to take me, he will surely find me, and I have done what he's expected of me, and so I am not responsible for either my own death or the death of others. If my neighbor needs me, however, I shall not avoid place or person, but will go freely as stated above. See, this is such a God-fearing faith because it is neither brash nor foolhardy, and does not tempt God. Thoughts about this quote from Luther? I think it's very expansive and complex and shows so much by way of what a holistic response is required of the church today. Any thoughts? It's just not all speak at once.
Yeah, this quote, in addition to, in this discussion, this quote is kind of just really fits with what's going on today. We have the responsibility to, by and large, stay at home in case we have this virus, not to pass it on, to wear masks in case we have the virus, that you don't pass it on to someone else. And me, I have a house where my daughter is immune suppressed. So it's very, we have to be very careful about her coming in and out of the house and who she's around and the like. And so we haven't been able to do much, even if I wanted to if I had the opportunity to volunteer and stuff, I really couldn't, because I need to protect my daughter in the house. So this quote is real apropos, that we need to do what we need to do. We pray and do those things as well, but we have recommendations from our health officials that say, hey, do this, and this will bring down the curve. So we have that responsibility as well.
Thank you, Phil. And you do see this, don't you, with Luther saying, don't just throw yourself at it. It was an epidemic. It was a plague. From the picture, at least, you see it must have been major concerns with respiration and the like facing the people, right? But don't just throw yourself in harm's way, because it could cause harm to others. And of course, in your situation with your daughter, that adds a whole new layer, right? And so heavy. Good thoughts. Thank you, Phil. Others?
Well, one thing that I see with this, is he's exercising good common sense in the process. And one of the things that I've had with some of the conversations that I've had with different people, want to overutilize it. Some people want to trivialize it. But, you know, the thing is, know that it's there, accept the fact that it's there, respect it, and then properly deal with it.
Yeah, very good.
And I think having, yeah.
Yeah, very good, Pastor Cliff. Just, you know, again, be mindful. We can either hype it up, trivialize it, or as you said, sensationalize it. And, you know, how to have that good common sense and a good spiritual concern as well. And I think Luther is modeling all that you're saying. Any other thoughts? Thank you, Cliff.
I think our tendency often is to think like binary in our culture. It's Democrat, Republican, or it's, you know, this is all a hoax and silly and some government overreach, or it's, you know, a very serious epidemic. You know, there's this, it's binary in nature, ones or zeros. That's it. There's no middle ground. And oftentimes I think in church discussions, and especially that's where I live. And so that's where I'm coming from, is that this idea that what do we do? What's the right thing to do? There's a wise choice, and wise is always safety. Like it's always what's safe. And I think that there's what Luther is suggesting here is that there's this wisdom in being safe and taking a calculated risk, an intelligent, informed risk for the sake of other. And so I think it takes. It's like this third way. It's this Jesus' third way kind of a deal. And I think that speaks to me a lot. Is this. Wisdom might say, I just need to stay home. I just need to, you know, be overly cautious. Don't want to offend people. Don't want to whatever, risk something. But to take intelligent, spirit-led risk, it's more difficult and hard to navigate, I guess.
It is.
I want to say it's more complex, and that seems like I'm trying to oversimplify, but I'm not. I just think it's very complex and difficult to know, and it takes humility and wisdom.
Yeah, thank you, CJ. Thank you. Trudy, you had something you wanted to say. It's still on mute.
There we go. I think that when we're dealing with that balance of respect and compassion, it ends up having respect and compassion, you know, as a total package. So in the action of respect of what the authorities are saying is safe, but yet finding creative ways to still show that compassion and outreach to the broader community, I think is what's being embraced within our communities when we're able to do that.
Thank you. And I would hope that, you know, I'm more alert to people, not just like, okay, am I keeping the 6 feet? Are they keeping the 6 feet? But, you know, we're supercharged with just tension right now and wariness, and even saying hello to someone, just saying hi. I've noticed that some people are actually more inclined to say hi when I'm going on a walk. I feel many people are more inclined to say hi now than they might have in the past, because they feel a sense of needing to connect with people. Other times just the opposite. But are we sensitive in a positive way, not just a wariness of, you know, the needed distance, but are we also alert not to be weary of others or to be wary of others, but wary of the pandemic and the need to engage always with compassion, with wisdom, and that like. Let me move on, and we'll have opportunity, no doubt, to come back to this. I appreciated the good thoughts once again. As Luther says, fumigate and fend off contagion with medicine. So Luther, with the medicine available to him in his day, did not say, forget science, forget medicine, just an enemy. Not at all. Fumigate, fend off contagion with medicine. He also says, don't be foolhardy. You know, be wise. Don't just go somewhere to go somewhere. Don't poke the bear of this virus or this epidemic, or in this case, the pandemic. Don't be foolhardy. At the same time, he says, fear God. And Luther was all about that, the fear of God. A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing. And so fear God, trust God. And then also care freely for neighbors in need. If my neighbor needs me, and I'm the only one at that moment who can be present to help, I need to engage. He doesn't say, forget about at that point, fumigate and fend off contagion. Doesn't say, okay, now be foolhardy, or now fear God or don't fear God. He keeps all these in balance. And that to me is wisdom. That's discernment. And I need that. I need that now more than ever. Matt, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say I totally appreciate that idea from Luther. The problem is I think that too much of the church lives with the quotation from Lewis that says, if the atomic bomb is going to come, let them find us living freely, basically, is what he's saying, like to where, doing sensible things, but still living. And so I wonder if the church is sort of caught in between George Bush saying, hey, we're not going to let them take us down, so go out and buy and shop, to then this idea of self-isolation and stay at home, not knowing what to do because we've always been doers. And so what we're seeing is the glaring absence, disconnectedness of the church over the years, to where now the Christian is like, oh, do I live by what Luther's saying? Do this, fear of God, or do I live with what Lewis was saying is, they could break us, but they're not going to take our wills, because we're going to show what we are able to do. And so, and so we have churches doing this. God, by the blood of Jesus Christ, we are saved. And so where does that, that tension come in? And so what theologian or what, teaching are we going from in the church? Is it a Luther or is it a Lewis? And so I think this confusion.
Yeah, and certainly if you had, you're referring to C.S. Lewis, I'm assuming, and with Lewis, as you certainly well know, Lewis was very balanced in many ways, but people could take Lewis out of context, or they could take Luther out of context. And so I think, yeah, as CJ said earlier, we live in these binaries. It's one or the other rather than a both and. And with Lewis and Luther, I think you're going to see a very complex strategy to account for all this. And that's why we need figures from the past who've gone through similar trials. And Luther being one, Lewis in his own context being another. And to make sure we're accounting for all that they say, like you're rightly exhorting, and also certainly what all of Scripture says. Jesus didn't always go right into the hornet's nest. Sometimes he pulled back. But he always had the big picture in play, always had that in mind. So good thoughts. Let's keep going. I thought it would be good to just share what friend of Matt's, mine, Mylan Homolo, and Gary Tribbett in their work, Compassion Connect, both Multnomah grads. Mylan was connected to New Wine during his student days. But I just think that this is really striking what they say. And I just encourage our viewers and listeners to take a look at what Compassion Connect and others have said. They say, think creatively about ways to be compassionate to those being hit the hardest. If you don't know who your literal next door neighbors yet, take the opportunity to introduce yourself and see if there's anything they need. If your church service is canceled, consider doing a FaceTime virtual church with a friend or friends. And many are doing that now. Offer to go grocery shopping or run other errands for a neighbor who is elderly or has a compromised immune system. Take the time to call someone who may be feeling lonely due to the increased separation measures. Brad, my phone line's open. Anytime you want to call Brad, I welcome that. People may be more receptive to an offer of prayer right now. Be open to where the Spirit may be asking you to intercede for someone. Offer to help with childcare for working parents now that schools are closing. And consider providing emergency shelter in your home to a local student who no longer has housing because of college dorms closing. And now, while this was presented a couple weeks ago, I think there's a lot of really good material that's still of great use to us and will be for some time. And I would say to people, even if, as some projections suggest, that we could be out of the worst of this in a week's time, or in a couple weeks' time, or a couple months' time, whether this comes back or not, what have we learned from this? As one of our other leaders that were drawing his insights from, Dr. Robert Potter, who is a medical doctor, a medical ethicist, works in the realm of social psychology as well. And he's part of this series on stepping out, not stepping down. Just interviewed him for this. And so that'll be made available to those taking this course. He says that, things have to change, and pandemics will come and go. We'll have similar situations in the future. What are we learning through this now that we can put in place for the long haul? So while the coronavirus, or this phase of the coronavirus, may be coming to an end before too long, let's not think we can just go back to business as usual in a way that we're not mindful of others in a certain strategic way, that we're better prepared next time, not just with face masks and cloths for hygiene and things of that sort, but that we're prepared in a variety of other ways, a holistic response to the issue, like Luther is suggesting as well. Now, as we think about this situation, we also have to think about not just individuals at large. We need to be concerned for everyone's well-being, but sometimes we can say we're concerned for everyone and then not be concerned for anyone. I mean, I can be so about the general good that I don't think of anyone's good. That's my fear for someone like myself. So I do need to care for others. I think we all agree. We need to care for one another and oneself. As Dr. Potter will say in his video, you have to love yourself too. I mean, I think it's a given that we love ourselves in Scripture. I mean, when it says love your neighbor as yourself, Jesus isn't saying don't love yourself. He says you can use yourself as a barometer. How do you like to be treated? Well, treat others well too. But love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love our neighbor as ourselves. Mark 12, 30 and 31. And part of that includes we need to take good care of ourselves. We need to sleep right. We need to eat right as best as we possibly can in this situation. We need to spiritual care, soul care, relational care. It's kind of like what they say on airplanes, right? It's kind of counterintuitive at times. First, put the mask on yourself before you put the mask on the person next to you. It's not because they're saying you're more important. It's, well, if you're not putting the mask on for yourself, how are you ever going to be able to help anyone? And I think we have to care for ourselves so that we can care well for others. But care for others and guard against shutting down where we just collapse emotionally, spiritually, physically. That's not going to help anyone. We need to care for shut-ins. That's what Compassion Connect in part said. And we also have to care for the shut-outs. And I just read an article yesterday, and really striking, troubling article in many ways, and so important for us to account for. And I think many of us, myself for one, can miss out on those who are often shut out. And so this activist, this leader, was quoted as saying, this is Ms. Seal. She claims that in an article interview with CNN, Black people, she runs the Balm of Gilead ministry, nonprofit working with faith communities to eliminate health disparities. I would hope that someday maybe I can interview her for this this series or other series. She says Black people are more likely than others, or this was not necessarily her perhaps, but this is in the article. I can't recall, but I think it's the article itself. Black people are more likely than other Americans having underlying health issues like diabetes, health disease, and lung disease. And I think that's because of access to healthcare in many respects, or the lack thereof, in our society with historical problems and present day problems with racialization. Blacks are also statistically more likely to live in poverty with less access to health insurance, and more are mistrustful of healthcare providers. If you think about Tuskegee and all that happened with their being used very diabolically for purposes that weren't really truly in the best interest of anyone, including the medical community. And then she says, this is Ms. Seal, this coronavirus is treacherous and it is relentless. It doesn't care if you have HIV, it'll fight with HIV for you, 2 viruses for the control of your death. And it just hit me as I read this article and read the story of a bus driver in Detroit who was African-American. He said, I'm really afraid of this virus in my work. Within a week, he was dead. And that can hit anybody, the Chinese, the Americans, the Germans, the Brazilians. It hits everybody. but it can also hit some communities more so than others because of historically being shut out in so many ways. Any thoughts on this particular point that I'm making here with this slide? Because I haven't heard that too often in the discussions around the coronavirus, but I think I need to, and we at New Wineskins need to really be attentive to this.
I can just jump in here, Paul. Something that's really been concerning to me, and it's really it's reality, that the African American community has really been hit hard by this. And the one thing in here that it shows that mistrust of healthcare providers, that also comes into play because of the past. And it's not only the past, but it still goes on. In fact, I just heard one of my close friends, cousin, had the virus just recently and went in the hospital, and they forced him into a room and made him become one of the test victims on this medicine that they're testing, trying to prove. And I'm still trying to find out the results of that. But this stuff still goes on. And there's a lot of mistrust around the healthcare providers.
Yes, and so, I think we have to account for that, don't we? Thank you, Cliff. We have to account for where people have been abused, whether by the faith community or the medical community, other communities. It's not just, paint with a broad brushstroke that, as we so often see in our community, science is bad, the conflict, or other communities have that conflict. But you have good reason to raise those concerns because that has happened. I mentioned Tuskegee before with all that occurred there, and these things can continue on in the present, and we need to be mindful and attentive and vigilant to make sure that where there are prejudices and structures of racialization in place, whether it's in the faith community, medical community, business community, and the like, that those are removed. And at New Wine, we seek to grow in our understanding and discernment and sensitivity toward pursuing equity in this and other domains. So thank you. One other thought or so, just mindful for your time as well, but this is such a key point and a key slide in this regard.
Paul, I think one of the, just playing on continuing to unpack this issue, the social injustices that are really being exploding into, not that people didn't know that they were there. I think whether they wanted to be blind to them or not, but the economic disparities, the racial disparities, the social injustices that we're seeing through this, and you can't hide it. And so whether someone is from a certain community that has never thought about this, now all of a sudden the haves, are confronted with the issue of how they have been treating the have-nots and not taking care of the other. And I think, again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, is the church's just absence throughout the years of this is, I think, again, coming to mind, where culture hasn't been taught how to take care of the other. And so we're seeing these discrepancies within the social injustices play out, and it's a bummer. But I think what the quotation there is, case in point, is to then, when you have not Medicare, economic, job opportunities, educational opportunities, and we see this when they're in the most time of need, they've been left behind by those who have. And I think this is where the coronavirus is really helping us to come to grips with, man, how have we been treating one another?
And I think to your point, Matt, again, a huge obstacle in what it does in devastating individuals and communities' lives. Will we take it as an opportunity to not deny the issue, but saying we need to change? We need to make sure we have better structures in place. It's a horror when it has to come to this, that we would have our eyes open. But will we have our eyes open is in part what you're asking, to be educated, to be people who are willing to advocate and agitate. As the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass said to young abolitionists, agitate, agitate, agitate. And we need to agitate toward equity. As we come to the end of this presentation today, it's really not the end. It's part of the ongoing process for us at New Wine, New Wineskins, that, you know, will we have the courage to enter into Jesus's DNA, if you will, to breathe the breath of the Holy Spirit and engage, not disengage. Jesus is constantly a challenge to me. You know, how often do I play the role of the disciple or the Pharisee and point fingers rather than lend a hand, give a heart? Those can be just words, but if we live the question, you know, how are we proceeding? Are we willing to risk calculated risks in the sense of being wise, but at the same time, being those who are willing to reach out when we don't have all the answers, when someone really needs us. And even if people are going to criticize us, we did it with as much wisdom as we had on hand and offer to us, but also that we're willing to risk, even if we're going to get criticized for it, if our aim is to fear God and love others, and to really listen to science, to point to science, not point fingers at science or others, to look to God and to lend a hand and to give a heart, our hearts. Closing thoughts from you. Some of you may need to leave, but I'm open to continuing the conversation for a while as you see fit. I appreciate the good interaction so far, but I'm really going to open it up now as we deal with this theme of the coronavirus. And as I said earlier, the title being, Don't Point Fingers, Lend a Hand, Give Your Heart. Thoughts from you? If you have to leave, I understand. Feel free to do so. But we'll go on for a little while longer as you see fit.
Yeah, Paul, can you hear me?
Yes, Richard.
Yeah, I think one of the things I was thinking as we were going through this was so much of my interaction, my human interaction right now is through digital media. And just because, you know, I'm at home, I got a grandparent staying with me because we just had a newborn. But
Congratulations again.
Yeah. But I look around and I see the conversations that people are throwing out there online, and that's kind of the only social interaction that's confronting me. I've withdrawn from social media to a large extent the last few years, but when I think about poking the bear, you're talking about the virus, but it seems like everything. I'm exaggerating that, but so much of the conversation that's happening online isn't helpful or helpful. It is just seems more divisive than anything else. Doesn't seem to be any opportunities to really probe people's heart. And I just, in this, it just seems like it makes it such a strange time to actually talk about an actual pandemic that's happening, because everyone's just remaining surface level. And the people that I'm close to that I would have heart to hearts with anyway, I'm probably reaching out to via phone or something like that. But I'd like to hear people speak to, just the climate of our culture online, and how to engage. Just there's so much frustration, and I think even the blame stuff that's going on, I see that as related to a sense of powerlessness that I think a lot of people feel. And so, you know, anger gives them some control, or seemingly a feeling of control. I'd like to hear what other people had to say about that.
Yes, and I'll open it up to others, and then I'll share at some point.
I don't want to hear Paul.
So God muted me there for a second, but I'll just say this real quick, Richard, and then open it up to others. Yeah, when I mentioned the poking the bear before, I indicated both coronavirus, and I was also trying to indicate that as we engage in this issue, or issues like this with the pandemic and how we might address it, you know, in words and deeds, we don't do it to just aggravate people. It's not that. We might agitate, we might raise issues, but it's not to aggravate as much as it is to bring about transformation. And so some might take it as poking the bear, what's our intent? What's our aim? Is it to build community? Is it to help? Or is it to curse? And so fair points that you're raising, Richard. Thoughts from others, since Richard doesn't want to hear from me. And thanks, Richard. It's always good to have good friends. But other thoughts from others here on the call, the video? Few of you haven't had a chance to say anything yet. Now's a good time if you wish to share, or no pressure.
Well, I agree with
Yeah.
what Richard was saying. I do see that side, but I'm also seeing a different side too. I'm seeing that in my community, at least, and I suspect it's happening similarly in other places. In my community, I see people who are banding together to help that in the past didn't even know each other. In the past maybe had never stepped out and done things like this. I know that there's a movement all over for individuals to make masks. You know, that's huge here. There's been tens of thousands of masks made by individuals in their homes here. Even 3D printing masks and face shields for the medical community to use. I live in Alaska, and so we're getting supplies here is even more difficult than it is getting them other places in the US. And so it's been a real encouragement to me to see people stepping out and doing what they can do in this situation. But I do also see the other side where people are just pointing fingers. They're more interested in making an argument than in actually doing something to help the situation. So the question I'm asking is, what can we do to encourage ourselves and our neighbors to step out and step up and actually do something, whatever it is that we can do to help the situation.
Yeah, excellent. And what I hear you saying, Lynette and Richard, is, you know, that we're dealing with the better angels of our nature and the lesser angels of our nature, to quote Lincoln. And so, yes, I think we see both. And how can we affect positive change, not to poke the bear, but in a sense to invite the bear, you know, in to be a part of the change and to be transformed ourselves in the process. Thank you,
Yeah, and
Lynette.
I keep going back to Philippians 2. And, you know, I'm hearing lots of people talking about, you know, my rights, this violates my rights. Matt kind of alluded to that sort of a perspective a little bit ago. And, you know, the restrictions violate my rights. And yet, if we look at the example of Jesus, who was God and yet laid aside his prerogative as God, to take on the nature of a servant, to take on flesh as a man in order to serve us, deferring to our needs, deferring to the needs of others. That's the example that inspires me, and that's the example that I hope and pray that I'll be able to follow.
Amen. Amen. Well said. Well said, Lynette. Thank you. Others?
Yeah, one of the things that I'm thinking about right now is, you know, people are stepping up all over the place to help each other, and we see this is a crisis, and we got to step in and deal with this thing. I'm really thinking about what happens when the country goes back to normal, and you know, I think about, sometimes we're really good at addressing crisis issues, but when the crisis is over, we just go on with things and don't realize that there's still all kinds of carnage out there. And I think of, you know, white Christians who worked really hard in the 1850s and 60s for abolition, you know, of slavery. And once slavery was made illegal and the Civil War was over, most white Christians in the North kind of went, hey, victory, we fixed the problem. And then Jim Crow took over in the South, but they went on to other things, you know, and I wonder what's going to happen, you know, in this situation, because when the crisis is over, so many people are going to be going, oh my gosh, I have to get my life back. I need to get back to work. I need to start being able to go to movies again and restaurants and all that type of stuff. But there's still going to be millions of people who are out of work when this thing is over, because a lot of those restaurants will have gone out of business. Mm-hmm. People won't have their jobs to go back to. And so, you know, I'm concerned about the church encouraging ourselves. Look, once culture goes back to normal, don't think that it's normal for everyone. Yeah. There's still a lot of work for us to do to stay engaged and see the people that still need help.
Hmm. So in a sense, even with this class, you know, in this course about stepping up, it's not just, okay, been there, done that, on to the next thing. It's like, no, it's a marathon race. It's not a sprint. You know, it's an ongoing reality. And are we going to be vigilant? That's what I hear you saying, Brad. And I think that also is a really timely and important word. Clint, I don't think, or Kayla, you haven't said anything recently. Clint, did you want to share? It says on the screen, Kayla, so that's why I'm saying it.
Well, and she's here too.
Oh, if Kayla wants to share, she can.
Nope, not particularly, apparently. Yeah, well, thinking back to the social media stuff, I don't really use it. I haven't used it in years, so I hear everything secondhand. But it's interesting, like kind of like what I appreciate what Lynette was saying about. I've noticed around town. I live in a smaller town. It's not. I don't really think of it as a small town like it was when I was a kid. But when I was younger, you know, you'd see people you know all the time. People would wave at you even if they didn't know you, if you're walking or riding your bike down the road, you know. And people haven't been like that in years. And then now I've noticed the last few weeks, everybody's doing that. You know, people are waving. You know, it don't matter if they know you or not. They're waving at you. And I still go for jogs the days I'm not working, and because there's a nice wide dike in Washougal where you can stay 6 feet apart, or go around people, you know, and maintain distancing, and everybody's, you know, really friendly and waving and smiling. So there has been a lot of that, and then, but I've heard a lot about the just some really nasty stuff that's going on online, and people just saying some really hurtful and hateful things. And something I don't know if it's the right or wrong response, but something back when I did use Facebook, I kind of made the commitment to never have an argument with. So it's kind of like texting. I never argue with people over text either. I think it's non-productive. Or unproductive, I mean.
Well, that helps me understand why you never respond to my texts. So.
Yeah. Well, I blocked your number months ago. So I think it seems to me like it's, as far as social media is concerned, it seems far more helpful to post and share positive and helping things rather than directly engaging against somebody, especially in a public way, like so posting on walls and things like that, or Twitter or whatever, it seems just more productive rather than arguing publicly over that type of format to continue to share positively and teach positively, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Very good. Very good. Other thoughts? Thank you on this, or other themes that have been raised in the discussion.
Can I reflect back to Brad's comment? I mean, that's as far as the church and how it's formatted right now. And it does make me wonder, what is it going to look like when we come to that? It'll be a new normal. It won't be the exact normal as before. But I mean, like right now, I feel like a lot of the layers of the bubble has been peeled away, at least in our setting. And so like in, the sanctuary auditorium is now a quarantine. The pews are labeled with dates as to when things are being processed out for the food pantry, and the fellowship hall is a food pantry, and another room is a secluded, sterilized packing, a classroom for packing meals and rice and beans. And it's like all these cool things are happening within the building, but it's like I just pray that when this kind of calms down, we don't lose that passion, that vision of continuing to not to I mean, the building is great, but it needs to be more used for the community at large, not just for a Sunday morning deal. And I just hope that continues. And with us, we're working really tightly with the school district. I was on a conversation with Paul Lida today with the Washington County on how to network all of the different churches and organizations together, and just breaking down those walls and creating network and conversation. And those are such healthy things of really being there for each other, not trying to do it all ourselves, but how can we collaborate? And I'm just praying that we don't lose some of the highlights of what's good and what's compassionate and merciful in this process going forward.
Well, just as you and Brad have said, Trudy, I think it's important for us, even in New Wine, doing our part, to even be thinking, while taking seriously the moment in which we're placed presently, to live in the moment, but also to take steps of how do we work with others to make sure that we're transitioning well, that the gains that have been made aren't short-term but long-term. So how can we be thinking even now to put in place pieces? Just think where we'd be as a society if we would not have dropped the ball after slavery, entering into Jim Crow, and after Jim Crow into the civil rights, and after civil rights. We have a history of repeating the same mistakes, of vigilant for a short term, but not for the long term. So even in New Wine, let's talk further about that beyond this session today, of how can we encourage one another and others that we grow in mindfulness, not lessen in it, but growing in it. And so that we transition well, so we learn from this and it doesn't become a further obstacle in the future. Cliff, did I see that? Thank you, Trudy. Did I see you had your hand up before? I thought I saw a hand, but I wasn't sure if it was on the screen or you were going to share something.
No, I'm going to share anything, but I have been just kind of pondering the conversation that's going on. One of the things that, and going back to what Trudy was saying and what others have shared, after 9/11, I noticed things, there seemed to be such a sense of brotherhood and fellowship everywhere I went. Before that, there was a lot of divisiveness, racism seemed to be prevalent. But right after 9/11, it seemed like all of that just went away. It was such a back to normal, back the way they were before that. And the other thing, when I'm right now, and adjustments to keep things going, to support the communities. But the other thing that really concerns me is when Barack Obama got elected, politics really came into play. And then following him, Donald Trump, politics came into play. I saw things, it was just like on the day after the election, I saw a change in our society, both when as well as when Donald Trump got elected. And it was such a dramatic thing. It's almost like flipping a light switch. And I really get concerned about things like what's going on right now. How long will it last? And what's going to cause it to change? Or is there a way, is there something that can be done to have these, to continue the civility, the togetherness, the charitableness, to continue that in a greater way without reverting back to the way things were before all of this happened.
Yeah, thank you, Cliff. Jonathan Haidt, whom we at New Wine have drawn from in terms of his insights in social psychology over and over again, said that one of the reasons why we've had, and this is before the coronavirus, this is like a couple of years ago, he said, we live in this culture of disgust, a lack of empathy is present. And he said, one of the things that has been lost is the greatest generation has passed from the scene. And the greatest generation, you know, those who went through the world wars, you know, they were sacrificing themselves for something greater. They might not have been thinking, as Lynette said, about Philippians 2, but there are certainly frames of reference there in keeping with Philippians 2, consider others better than yourselves, to allude back to that powerful biblical text. And I think that, you know, with this situation today, in some circles, as Lynette was saying, there's people putting others before themselves, considering others better than themselves. Can we learn from this? Again, to learn from this so that we continue to do this after and not lose our vigilance, and wherever there is empathy, increased empathy, that we would put away the culture of disgust, and really, no matter where we come from on the political ideological spectrum, to try and meet our neighbor. And Jesus was a master of loving the neighbor, the other, whoever the other might be. And it's such a challenge to me. Thank you, Cliff. A few other thoughts, and then we'll perhaps close it up for the day.
I think something practical, I don't know, in this video or another, that could be discussed is the this new normal idea. In many of these conversations that I've had, there's a lot of comfort with those who were successful in the previous normal. And there's a desire to get back to that. That's, in fact, I have a friend of mine who's a little older than me, who is, that's very much his hope, is that we can get things back to normal, back to normal, back to normal. And that's the talk. And even discussion about a new normal is intimidating and is scary. And I don't know what that looks like. I liked the old normal. And so it's I think that might just be a New Wine discussion as well, as like, how do we have that conversation about what the new normal is, what things about the previous normal, as it were, do we need to hold on to and come back to, and what things do we really need to let go? There's a lot of,
with that, Clint and I were in a class today where a student pastor was sharing that one of the concerns he rightly has is, as we move towards Zoom and remote, will we become somewhat lackadaisical, that maybe we don't need to return to some of that? As much as people miss being connected to one another in person, might there be something in terms of that old normal that we could lose in the new normal that really shouldn't be lost with the in-person? Because so many people feel comfortable in the virtual realm, and it helps us in times like this. But I think that's one of the things that comes into play, CJ, and many others as well, is what's good about the old normal, what's good about the new normal, what should be the new normal moving forward. And yeah, we should have that discussion at New Wine. Thank you. Richard.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say, kind of related to what CJ just said.
Can you speak up a little more? It's a little.
Yeah. Is that better?
Yeah.
Just before this conversation, kind of related to what CJ was saying, I was talking with one of my pastor friends, and he pastors in a really small church, and they're recording the church service during the week, and the competition all of a sudden is everyone's video church, though. So and they don't know the strong point of their church is a small community church, probably less than 75 people, and because of the social constraints put on us, they've lost all that. So everyone's stuck in their home, and then you see people post on Easter Sunday where people are watching sermons from Franklin Graham rather than their local church or whoever, Tim Keller, I don't know, And as we were talking about it, we were trying to think of what ways can community, maybe something that can be incorporated right now with the social restrictions we're under, be carried forward to that new future.
Yeah, well put. And I think we have to be vigilant and reflecting on this at New Wine in partnership with churches. And, you all represent various faith communities. How do we partner with our faith communities in service of those faith communities, as well as to the broader good, on really cultivating community in whatever means, but to really cherish those localized communities? It's so crucial, even while we can learn from many others, how to be present in our own context. Any closing thoughts?
I just like to say, Paul, today, and thanks for inviting me to be a part of this. To conversation.
Yeah, Cliff, it broke up. Oh, go ahead.
I'm gonna have to get going, but I just wanted to say, express my thanks. I just for being a part of this discussion.
Well, thanks always for shaping the New Wine community as a leader over the years. Grateful for your own perspective and voice, and helping us move forward at New Wine. So thanks.
Yep. Thank you. Bye now.
Goodbye. Well, thank you all. We should probably close it off there. And just grateful for everyone sharing today and for reflecting. We'll be doing this in other contexts. As you know, this is the first quote unquote episode in a course we're doing on stepping up, not stepping down or shutting down. For this course, this being on the coronavirus today, not to point fingers, but to lend hands and to give our hearts. And yes, thanks for those comments. And we will look forward to more of these opportunities, other courses that New Wine is doing through Multnomah Plus and other domains, and look forward to the ongoing networking and being vigilant together with you. Thank you. Blessings to all who watch and listen, and being a part of this community with us at New Wine, New Wineskins, for our own communities wherever we might be. Blessings. Bye.
Thanks, Paul.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.